Welcome to another masterpiece of mayhem, Cunning Criminals. We will cover the Knightsbridge Security Deposit Robbery. $98 million gone. A conman walks into a bank and walks out with millions. Here's how. It was an ordinary summer afternoon in London, the kind of day when the world seemed to go about its business without a hitch. But just as people drifted along the Knightsbridge streets unaware, the unthinkable was unfolding behind the closed doors of an inconspicuous building. Nestled on one of the city's poshest streets was a fortress hidden in plain sight. The Knightsbridge Safe Deposit Center. What began as a quiet day was about to turn into the site of one of the most audacious robberies in modern history. A heist that would leave London shaken to its core. Picture this, July 12, 1987. A modest building with a nondescript facade, where affluent customers walked in and out to store their most prized possessions. Behind the veneer of tranquility lay a vault, teeming with riches, cash, jewelry, gold bars, treasures that told stories of generational wealth. And just beyond the front desk, lurking in the shadows, was a mastermind who had crafted the unthinkable. Valerio Vici, an Italian national, had left his fingerprints across Europe's criminal underworld long before arriving in London. He wasn't a common thief. Vici was a specialist, someone who treated bank vaults like puzzles waiting to be solved. When he looked at Knightsbridge, he didn't just see security systems and locks, he saw opportunity. And in July of that year, he decided that opportunity was ripe for the taking. They walked in, Valerio and his associate, dressed like any other wealthy customers. There were no ski masks or drawn guns, just a confident air, impeccable clothing, and an innocent request to rent a safe deposit box. They were polite, even charming. The staff had no reason to suspect that these two men were anything but customers. But Vici wasn't there to store a family heirloom or deposit bonds. He was there for something far more sinister. Behind his charming smile lurked a ruthless ambition, a man who lived for the thrill, with a penchant for excess and danger. The polite conversation quickly turned when they asked to see the vault, and the moment the door closed behind them, the atmosphere shifted. Valerio pulled out his concealed weapon. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, just a sudden display of power that left the staff stunned and terrified. With a flick of his wrist, the transformation was complete. What had started as a regular day had turned into a nightmare. The heist wasn't chaotic. It was deliberate, carefully orchestrated, every move a testament to Vici's meticulous planning. Within minutes, the guards were tied up, the cameras had been neutralized, and the staff lay on the ground, helpless. Vici and his accomplices moved like a well-oiled machine, precision and calmness guiding them as they worked. The vault was before them, a treasure trove concealed behind cold steel and layers of reinforced security. Yet in that moment, it was not an obstacle. It was an invitation. They broke open box after box, and the riches flowed. Piles of cash, exquisite jewels, rare artifacts. Each box they cracked open seemed to reveal a new chapter of someone's life. The valuables, secrets, the untold stories of the city's wealthiest residents. There was a frenzy in their eyes, a hunger as they stuffed bags to the brim, knowing the magnitude of what they were doing. Not just a theft, but a brazen violation of trust. Outside, London continued its weekend rhythm. The roar of cars, the chatter of shoppers, the clinking of glasses in nearby cafes. No one knew what was happening behind those stone walls. No one suspected that millions were being taken, one deposit box at a time, while the world kept moving. For Valerio, this wasn't just about money. It was about making a statement, a declaration that he could outsmart the establishment, that he could challenge the security systems built by some of the smartest minds in the business and win. He wanted to prove to himself and the world that he could take what he wanted whenever he wanted. It was the thrill that drove him, the feeling of invincibility. Hours ticked by. This wasn't a heist where every second mattered. They had time. They were methodical. And then came the crucial moment. They needed to leave before suspicion grew. They were confident in their execution, but even the best-laid plans come with a ticking clock. They knew they needed an escape plan as airtight as the heist itself. And then, just like that, they were gone! Bags in hand, slipping out without a trace. The Knightsbridge Safe Deposit Center was left in shambles, open boxes, discarded jewelry, documents scattered across the floor. It wasn't until hours later that the staff, trembling and shaken, managed to sound the alarm. By then, Vichier and his team had vanished into the maze of London streets. The aftermath was chaos. Police swarmed the area. News vans lined the streets, cameras flashed, and the media erupted with headlines of London's largest heist, $98 million. It wasn't just the value of what was stolen. It was the brazenness, the audacity of it all. People questioned how such a robbery could happen in broad daylight in a building thought to be impenetrable. Scotland Yard began its investigation, piecing together the sequence of events. Witnesses were interviewed, fingerprints were lifted, surveillance footage was analyzed, but they were always just a step behind. Vichy had planned every detail with a chilling precision, and he had an advantage. He was a seasoned professional who knew how to evade, how to disappear. But there was one thing Vichier hadn't counted on: his own hubris. In the aftermath of the heist, while the city was reeling, Valerio Vichier wasn't content to sit quietly and enjoy his newfound wealth. He began to live even more lavishly, flaunting his money, and with each flamboyant display, he drew the attention of law enforcement closer. He couldn't resist the thrill, the temptation to live on the edge. As Scotland Yard dug deeper, they began to connect the dots. They were closing in, and yet Vichier seemed to think he was untouchable. He had crossed borders, taken on new identities, but his appetite for risk became his Achilles heel. He returned to London, perhaps out of arrogance, perhaps out of nostalgia for the city he had bested. Whatever it was, it would soon lead to a reckoning. The police were ready. They knew who they were dealing with, and they were patient, waiting for the right moment. And when Vichier set foot back in the city, their net tightened. He wasn't just facing a burglary charge. He was facing the full weight of a nation's anger. The arrest was swift, decisive, and the mastermind behind the Knightsbridge heist was finally in custody. But what about the money? The millions that had vanished? Rumors swirled. Some said it was hidden in offshore accounts. Others believed it was stashed away in secret locations across Europe. The truth remained elusive, adding another layer of mystery to the already legendary heist. Despite his arrest, the allure of the missing fortune persisted, a tantalizing puzzle that seemed destined to never be fully solved. The trial was a spectacle. Vichier sat in the dock, a picture of defiance, his charm undiminished, even as the charges mounted. He was unapologetic, almost proud. The courtrooms were filled, the media coverage relentless, and yet, even in those moments, Vichier seemed to revel in the attention. To him, this was part of the thrill, the spectacle of it all. As the first part of our story draws to a close, we leave Valerio Vichi at the peak of his infamy. The audacious mastermind, the man who dared to rob Knightsbridge in broad daylight, was now facing the consequences of his actions. But his story wasn't over, and neither was the saga of the stolen millions. The unanswered questions, the missing fortune, and the legend of a heist that captivated the world, all of that was yet to unfold. Valerio Vice sat in his cell, staring at the concrete walls. Despite being surrounded by bars and locked doors, there was something in his eyes that hadn't faded. A glimmer of defiance, of unfinished business. For Vice, his story was far from over. The world might have thought that catching the mastermind would be the end, but they underestimated just how deep his connections ran, how fiercely he still clung to his ideals. Word of the trial had spread like wildfire, and the city of London was divided. Some saw Vice as nothing more than a criminal who had violated the sanctity of a supposedly impenetrable fortress. Others, however, were secretly fascinated by the man who had pulled off the impossible, a David who had dared to challenge the Goliath of security institutions. The aura of mystique surrounding the missing millions only served to heighten public interest, and whispers of admiration could be heard in the darkest corners of the underworld. Scotland Yard, meanwhile, wasn't letting up. They had one question above all others: where was the money? The heist itself had been daring, but the real mystery lay in the aftermath. $98 million didn't just disappear without a trace. Vice refused to talk, leaving investigators chasing leads that seemed to vanish into thin air. They scoured his known contacts, traced his financial history, and interrogated his associates, but Vice's network was as intricate as the heist itself, layers upon layers designed to obfuscate and confuse. A lead emerged, however, in the form of a former associate. A man who had once been close to Vice, but who had since found himself in a dire situation. Facing charges of his own, he offered Scotland Yard a deal: information in exchange for leniency. He spoke of a safe house, a location where Vice had supposedly stashed a portion of the loot. It wasn't much, but it was enough to spark hope among the detectives. They moved quickly, following the trail to a remote farmhouse in the English countryside. The raid was swift, executed in the early hours of the morning when the world was still asleep. They found the farmhouse exactly as the informant had described, isolated, hidden away from prying eyes. Inside, they uncovered evidence that pointed to Vice's meticulous planning: maps, blueprints, false identities, and a small cache of money. It was a fraction of the stolen millions, but it was proof that Vice hadn't been working alone. There were others, accomplices who had managed to slip away, each holding a piece of the puzzle. Back in his cell, Vice heard of the raid. He didn't react, his expression betraying nothing, but behind those eyes, gears were turning. He knew the game was far from over. The authorities might have found one hideout, but they would never find them all. He had planned for every possibility, anticipated every move they might make. The money was scattered, hidden across borders, in places where only he and a select few could ever hope to find it. The trial continued, and with each passing day, the public's fascination grew. Witnesses took the stand, recounting the events of that fateful day, the fear they had felt as Vice and his men took control of the vault. The prosecution painted a picture of a ruthless criminal, driven by greed and a disregard for the law. The defense, however, portrayed a different image: a man who had grown up in hardship, who had been shaped by a world that had given him no opportunities, who had turned to crime as a means of survival. It was a narrative designed to elicit sympathy, to sway the jury by humanizing the man behind the heist. But even as the lawyers argued back and forth, the real drama was playing out elsewhere. Vice had allies, people who were still loyal to him, and they were working behind the scenes to ensure that his legacy would live on. Rumors began to circulate that plans were being made for his escape. Whispers of bribes, of corrupt officials, of daring schemes that would see him break free from his prison cell. The authorities dismissed it as mere gossip, but they couldn't ignore the tension that seemed to hang in the air. And then, in the dead of night, something happened that would shock even the most seasoned officers. A breakout attempt. Ha ha! It was bold, almost cinematic in its execution. A group of masked men, armed and determined, managed to breach the prison's perimeter. Alarms blared, guards rushed to contain the situation, and for a brief moment, it seemed as if Vice might actually escape. The chaos was palpable, a scene straight out of a thriller, with shadows moving in the dark, gunfire echoing through the halls. But the attempt failed. The guards on high alert managed to repel the attackers. Vice was dragged back to his cell, his chance at freedom slipping through his fingers. The aftermath was a flurry of questions, of tightened security, of increased scrutiny on anyone who had ever been associated with the Mastermind. The message was clear. Valerio Vice might have been bold enough to rob Knightsbridge, but he would not be allowed to slip away so easily. The trial came to an end, and the verdict was delivered. Guilty on all counts. Vice was sentenced to a lengthy prison term, a fate that many saw as inevitable. But even as he was led away, there was something about his demeanor that suggested this wasn't the end. He walked with his head held high, a faint smile playing on his lips, as if he knew something that the rest of the world didn't. To those who watched, it was clear that Valerio Vice was a man who thrived on the thrill of the game, and as long as there was a game to be played, he would find a way. The story of the Knightsbridge heist didn't end with Vice's imprisonment. The stolen millions remained missing. The accomplices were still at large, and the legend of the heist continued to grow. People spoke of hidden vaults, of secret codes, of fortunes buried in places that only a select few knew about. The mystery endured, a testament to Vice's cunning and his refusal to give up. Valerio Vice might have been locked away, but his influence lingered. The heist had become more than just a crime. It was a symbol of defiance, of challenging the establishment, of refusing to play by the rules. And as long as the money remained missing, the story would continue to captivate the world. A reminder that sometimes the lines between hero and villain are not as clear as we might think. And so, the legend of the Knightsbridge Security Deposit Robbery lived on, a story of audacity, of cunning, of the thrill of the chase. The tale of Valerio Vice, the man who dared to dream big, to take on the impossible, and who, even in defeat, left behind a legacy that refused to be forgotten.